Okay, we are on Wojo and looking under the chart table at the main battery selector switches. And this is a little unique in that on the left we have the selector for battery 1, battery 2. Battery 1 being the starter battery 2 being the house batteries. You also have an option of putting them together. Since we're going to be looking at some of the systems, we're just going to put it on the house, number 2. And then on the right, there's a separate switch for the engine, which we'll leave off for now. Also, between those two main switches are in the middle and lower is the circuit breaker for the windlass, and then above that is a breaker for the main battery systems. So if you were never getting DC power after turning on the batteries, you'd want to check and see if you needed to reset that breaker. Okay. Also down here, as long as we're under the chart table, we have a Thermo King inverter, which will show how that gets tied into the system and switched on. Okay. Up top, we have our standard, although a little more complex, electrical panel. On the right-hand side is the AC. Again, over here we have the 30 amp breaker, and on this boat there's actually a couple different breakers that we'll look at. There's also showing shore power on right now and a reverse polarity if say one of the shore power leads was not making contact. We then have for port and starboard outlets, those breakers are on. The water heater is currently off. The battery charger is on. And we'll talk a little bit about this when we use the inverter. Pretty much everything else is standard. Right now we have autopilot, nav instruments, VHF, and the radar switched on. Over to the left of this panel, you can then select to check the battery voltage. Since we're on the charger, we're getting 13.5 volts on basically both batteries. We can also see that there's another breaker here, and then this is for the bilge pump, which has an auto and manual mode. Also a light indicating when that comes on. In addition to that, there's another safety feature, and that is up here we have, we're on shore power right now, even though the light is not lit. But if we want to use the inverter, we have to, and we're on shore power, we actually have to turn off the shore power, and we're going to slide the switch so that we can then turn on the inverter. Okay. We're also at this time going to turn off the battery charger because we don't want to run the battery charger through the inverter because that's a self-defeating process. So I'm now going to turn on the inverter, and you'll see it comes up to voltage, and our inverter has now come on, as you can see this line. Okay. So one thing about running the microwave on the inverter is if you do a little simple math and you say your microwave draws 10 amps at 120 volts, if you then run it through the inverter, which is converting the 12 volts, you're easily drawing over 100 amps out of the battery. So not something you want to do for any long period of time because you'll drain your batteries. Okay, So we have that inverter on right now. We're going to go ahead and turn that off. And again, we'll just flip this switch. We can then switch back to shore power. Oh, and we're going to turn the battery charger back on since we're still here at the dock. We're going to look at the house batteries. They are right by the step. Oh, that's fun to get out. So we can see two large house batteries, and these are in parallel, so you have a lot of amp hours here. And again, this is under battery 2, both of these batteries. So I'm going to put the cover back on, and we're going to look at the starter battery. And this panel does not have any of the screws in, and that is so you can actually lift it out and see a couple items. One is the starter battery, which has a lot of really interesting green corrosion on it. We're going to have to work on that. As well as another section of the forward part of the bilge. And some of these wires here are mostly grounds. It's a ground bar, but also we have, for monitoring the current from the batteries, we have a controlled resistance that goes through. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back in place. Wojo has a Yanmar diesel. The Yanmars are a little different from the Westerbeeks and Universals we have on other boats, in that they have a mechanical fuel pump rather than an electric one. Also, they don't have any glow plugs, so no need to worry about turning on a glow plugs. They run at higher compression, so they start without having to preheat. Okay, we're going to check the oil, and on Wojo, you can just tip this out, and there's a keeper, so you can come in here and both check the coolant and the oil. The dipstick's down here. Paper towels are up above your head, so it's really convenient. Grab the dipstick. And now we're going to clean it. Now, look at this. It says there's no oil, but we put it back in. I bet it's going to tell a different story. And there you can see it's right up to almost to the top. So when the engine cools, sometimes because this is in a tube and doesn't actually go into the crankcase, it can give a false reading when you first pull it out. So you have to be a little careful. You wouldn't want to add oil and find out you've overfilled it. Okay, and coolant is okay. And if we look down, and if you can see, the absorber is nice and white. That's under the engine in that compartment. And again, if it was black, it's an oil leak. If it's pink, it's a fuel leak. And if it's yellowish or greenish, it's a coolant leak. And if it's just water, it's clear. So nothing in there right now, which is good. That's a really quick check to see if anything's going wrong with the engine. This is the fuel filter, and the high pressure pump is right down here. Something that may be hard to get to, but there is right down here someplace, I'll get my hand on it, is the mechanical pump. And you can see it has, well, you may be able to see it has a little red paint on it. This is the mechanical fuel pump that my thumb is actuating. If you needed to prime this because it doesn't have an electronic lift pump. But that's usually only needed if the fuel filter has been changed or there had been some type of a leak and air got into the system. The water pump on this boat is a little more difficult to get to than some of the other ones, and that's the raw water pump, which is right back here. You can see the hoses. That's a usual giveaway that it's a water pump, and you have 4 Allen screws that you would have to take off to get to the impeller. While we're here, we can see the starter motor and the starter motor solenoid. This is a very important wire here, which has a little spade connector, because that is coming from the starter button up on the instrument panel. If that were to be disconnected, the solenoid won't engage and you won't be able to start the engine. So that's one thing you can check. It's very easy to see here, and if the engine didn't want to start, make sure that wire is still intact. Okay, so we're looking at the back of the engine now, and this is actually the water through hole with the key on it. You would open this and take the key off. Also, you have then the transmission right next to it, and the packing gland, which should drip and has just recently been adjusted, so it is not dripping while the boat is sitting here, but it would drip as the engine is, or the shaft is turned. So something that is pretty much most appropriate for the boat chief or the maintenance team to make adjustments for. Taking this off gives you another view of the packing gland where the shaft goes through, and there's not much else in here, but it's useful to know what's under this panel. Okay, we're in the aft compartment, and we are going to be checking the strainer, and we've got a nice new strainer. This is like the one on Mistral, and you can just look in it and see that there's nothing in there, and it's nice and clean. We also have, I'll borrow your light, we have the Raycor, which is for the diesel, and a separator. And if we can get this light behind it, you can see it's nice and pink, and diesel fuel, nice and pink. If it was milky, we'd be concerned with water. Now we have also the Aqualift, and this particular Aqualift does not have a drain. Comes in from the engine, goes into the top, comes out in the back on the aft side, the bottom. If you were to need to drain this Aqualift, probably the easiest way would be to disconnect the hose right here. Ideally, you'd disconnect the one in the aft, but then you'd have to take the whole bed out. So if you were concerned about getting too much water in this hose backing up to the engine, you could just disconnect it right here and drain it into the bilge. So again, that's if you were to be running, cranking the engine without it starting, water will start to back up. And we don't want that to happen because it can destroy an engine. We are in the aft compartment. There is a cabinet here. We have, we see it says fire extinguisher inside, and here in fact is the fire extinguisher. This is like a closet for jackets. On the aft side, you can see some TP down here, but also it says the flux gate is below. Store no metal here, or your compass will go squirrely on you. There is some metal up here, but you don't want it to end up on the bottom shelf, or that will cause some navigational challenges. So also in the aft compartment, you can see labeled flopper stoppers, and these can be put on a spinnaker pole or a whisker pole off the beam of the boat, lowered into the water, and they will stop the rocking beam to beam of the boat, which can drive you nuts at night. So there's looks like 2 of them, so you could put one off of each side and sleep better. Although I will mention that if you're on a single anchor and the boat can swing, sometimes it will tangle up with the flopper stopper. Under this panel, we have what looks like a bilge pump, but it's actually the shower drain pump. And if you point over here, you will see that there's a strainer there. So that should be checked periodically, probably on the monthly maintenance list, but it usually ends up with miscellaneous hair and other stuff. So if the shower is not draining, you can always check that. But to get the shower pump on, you have to have the switch on the main panel, but then there is a separate button in the shower, and of course you have to open the drain, and in here you have 3 through holes. You have the one for the sink, the intake for the toilet, and then the shower sump outlet is the upper one, and it's labeled, so that would have to be opened before the shower drain could be used. Basically, once the switch on the DC panel is on and the drain through hole has been opened, you can push the button to drain the shower stall. So a nice separate shower, which is unique only to Wojo in our fleet. Continuing on with the discussion of the plumbing system, we're now under the sink, and we have here the water pressure pump, but below it is a manifold, and those are labeled for the forward water tank, mid water tank, and aft water tank. So we have 3 separate water tanks on this boat, and they can be switched on or off just through here. Right now all 3 of these are open. There is on the upper one is another switch. This is actually for a whale pump up on the by the sink, such that if the motor failed, you could still get water by hand pumping it. So that's another feature on this boat. Again, we're under the sink. We have the through hole. I'm actually going to turn that on since we had a little water flowing, and close it again. And the large metal box is the water heater. So that is taking coolant from the motor to heat the water, and then gets distributed to the heads and the head, and there's a sink in the forward compartment, and then the shower swim step. So if the engine's been running, then you can have hot water on the boat. We might as well go up to the forward compartment, and while there's no restroom here, we do have a sink, as we just talked about, that if the water pressure's on, you will have water. You have to then, of course, open the through hole to drain the sink, and we also see that we have a nice wet dry vac that can be used when you're out cruising or working on the boat. Also up here is a locker with manuals. Besides manuals, assorted other things, there is the emergency tiller that would be used in the event of a steering failure. So the holding tank is on the starboard side, and that's what we're looking at here, but the actual macerator is forward of that, and we can see the actual macerator and the through hole. And one nice feature is you can see that the tubing is you can see through, and you can actually put the light here while you're macerating, and you can see stuff going out, and it lets you know then when it's empty. Besides just the pitch, you'll see that things are no longer moving. We're in the cockpit. Going to look at the couple things. Now, one is, let's first look at the propane locker. This is the propane locker. Valves closed as it should be. We are opening it, and actually it doesn't read any pressure. Oh, it's full. So we have a faulty gauge currently, and the way, again, to measure how much propane is in the tank is by weighing it. Now, this feels very full, but we actually, I believe on Wojo, have a scale, and on the tank the full weight and empty weight are listed, so you can get a good measure of how much propane. Okay, valve is closed, and on Wojo, first you have to open the valve on the tank, and then there are actually two electric switches, one on the main panel and one by the galley, to actually turn on the electric switch, which then provides the propane. So it's kind of a double safety feature. And this propane locker vents overboard, so there's no concern about getting propane into the boat, which would be not a good situation. Now on the other side we have a virtually identical locker, but in this case we use it to store propane canisters for the barbecue, which is right above it and loose. That needs to be fixed. And a fuel tank for the outboard for the dinghy, and that's a nice storage. Again, you wouldn't want a gas tank in the stern lazarette, because if it's spilled, it goes into the bilge, and that could get quite exciting. So as we're by this lazarette, go ahead and open it up, and see a number of items here. We do have the master breaker. This is for shore power, because the shore power is coming in right back here. We have a fire extinguisher right down below, and then I believe under this metal cover is the battery charger. Okay, on the shelf we have spare coolant. Looks like DI water. This is the fuel treatment, enzyme fuel treatment. It's the bug killer. You want to add this before you add fuel. We also have an extra fender, some lines, and more jugs of water, a couple life jackets, which are a little hard to get to. Also, similar to Angel Sea, we can see the mechanism for the auto helm, and that's right down here. We have the motor, and it's attached directly to the rudder post. So if your steering were to fail, the cable breaks, you can use the auto helm to actually drive the boat. There is a separate emergency tiller which goes right in this. You have to open this up, and the emergency tiller on this boat is in the forward berth closet on the starboard side. Don't fall. Okay. So in this lazarette, we have a lot of empty space right here, but we have a manual bilge pump and the handle. There it is. And you just pump it. And it's actually pumping a little bit of water overboard. We can see our swim step shower, which is right here, and it's accessible from the back. It's a really nice feature when if you're out swimming or kayaking and end up getting a little wet, want to get the salt off. If the engine's been running, you can get hot water. And also, let's see, we have the refrigerator compressor, which is right down here. If you have that on, you'll hear a hum from it. And then we have a variety of buckets, brushes, cleaning gear in this mostly empty lazarette. And that does connect to the other side down in between. So sometimes things get in the middle down there. It can be a little tricky to get them out. Okay, we're going to check Wojo's anchor locker. And you can see that we have probably about 100 feet of chain and then another 140 or more feet of road, which is actually tied off down here. The chain is in the windlass on the Gypsy, but there's also a separate line securing the anchor. We also have on this boat, you have both down and up. Some of the boats only have an up for the anchor, but this way you can lower it and either by hand or by the windlass. And then you have the up, and they're labeled with arrows. Also here is the fill for the forward water tank. Again, on Wojo, there's 3 tanks, and we'll look at the other fill points. So this one's in the forward locker. Oh, one more thing I think some people don't realize is on the windlass, if you take this bar and slide it in right here, you can actually release this drum, and then the chain or road can go out, and you can control that speed. So that basically loosens this whole mechanism. But you then need it tight to be able to pull up the anchor with the windlass. Okay, so as we start back, we come to another water fill point, and it's labeled water. That's for the mid tank. On the opposite side of the boat is waste. Don't want to get them mixed up, so they're nicely labeled. So that's for the holding tank. And then as we come back, we have 2 more fill points. And in the aft port side is diesel, and on the aft starboard side is water. And again, do not get those mixed up. If you put water in the diesel, that's no fun cleaning it up. So that's for the aft tank, which is under the aft berth on the starboard side. The fuel tank is under the aft berth on the port side. Hope you enjoy this video, and definitely watch it before your first training. Thanks.